That's quite a long countdown.
Because we have to catch up to the live stream. Otherwise, that starts a little later than the...
Okay, understand.
Yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ms. Debashree Mukherjee, Special Secretary, Ministry of Jal Shakti, Mr. Nikhil Sawhney, Senior Vice President, AIMA, and Vice Chairman and Managing Director, Triveni Turbine Limited, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to have you all with us and a very warm welcome to you all in AIMA Aspire's 4th Womenpeak session. Ms. Mukherjee, it is a pleasure to have you join us today, and many thanks for agreeing to do a session on adaptable leadership for AIMA. You're a key leader of a ministry that has become extremely important as the world is getting anxious about both the scarcity and the utilization of water. You've been involved with policy, programs, and administration of water management in many of your previous positions also, which include being a part of the Prime Minister's office. You've been the CEO of Delhi Jal Board, and you've headed the water and sanitation services in Goa. In your long and varied career in civil service, you've also led Delhi Transport Corporation and worked in the administration of Arunachal Pradesh. You bring an exceptional educational background to civil service as you hold a master's degree in water and environment management and linguistics. We look forward to hearing how you have managed to make the switches between different roles in your career and how have you adapted to different responsibilities. Thank you once again so much for joining us, and a very, very warm welcome to you. Nikhil, it is a pleasure to have you with us, and thanks so much for agreeing to moderate this session. Your group has been involved in intensive water and environment management, and you're very involved on how to use and conserve this precious resource. The Triveni CII Water Institute is also led by you and is doing stellar service. You're also the leader of a large and varied business group, and you care about developing leaders who can adapt to changing roles and responsibilities. We look forward to an exciting conversation between you and Ms. Mukherjee. Thank you for joining us, and a very warm welcome to you. Ladies and gentlemen, adaptability is becoming a required trait for leaders these days. Just in the past 3 years, leaders have had to navigate multiple crises, including COVID, war, inflation, and persistent uncertainty. Through all these instability, everyone has also been rushed to adapt to technological transition of production and consumption. The world is being subjected to rapid and unprecedented changes, and the leaders must learn, unlearn, and relearn frequently and quickly. With disruption and instability becoming the new normal, the movement of leaders across roles and responsibilities has accelerated. Simultaneously, the leaders are under pressure to shed the reliance on the tried and trusted formulas to solve new management problems. There is a big premium on adaptable leaders who can reinvent themselves and their organizations at short notice and undertake previously unfamiliar tasks and responsibilities. Adaptability to new responsibilities and teams is a routine for those who serve in the civil services, and we are privileged to have someone who has a vast experience of taking on varied roles and responsibilities through her long career. I'm sure that all of us will learn a lot by listening to Ms. Mukherjee's experiences and insights. With these words, it is my pleasure to invite Nikhil to conduct the session. Over to you, Nikhil.
Thank you very much, Rekha. Ms. Debashree Mukherjee, Special Secretary, Ministry of Jal Shakti, Rekha, Sethi, Director General, AIMA, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you for joining us for a session with an outstanding civil servant and an accomplished administrator. Ms. Mukherjee, many thanks for doing this session for AIMA's Women Council. When Rekha told me that you had accepted this to speak to us, I grasped the opportunity to moderate, because I do have an association in the same field in which you operate, which is in water. And it is such an important sector for the citizens of the country as well as for the nation. And I thank you very much for your focus on this. Ma'am, you serve the people of India in many capacities in different places, and I'm sure that our audience will love to hear your experience of adapting to life and leadership on the move. We appreciate that you have agreed to share your mantras of adaptation and your experiences of taking on new roles and responsibilities under changing circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, the rapid and dramatic changes in the economic conditions of the past few years have made leaders particularly conscious of the need to be versatile and agile. These days, it's not enough to mobilize, organize, and direct. Now leaders have to have superpowers to shapeshift, to deal with unanticipated obstructions and amid great upheaval and change, leaders are expected to somehow deliver absolute clarity and certainty. Leaders have no option but to take instant new avatars as the demands on their roles and expertise keeps changing. At times, the adaptability of a leader is tested by the new roles or extended responsibilities, which could involve tackling unfamiliar issues and working with new teams. In such an event, a leader cannot take too long to come to terms with their new commitments, colleagues, customers, as well as competitors. As such events become more frequent in organizations because of the fluidity of circumstances, everyone in a leadership position needs to develop capacity for potential extension or a shift in responsibility. Too often, leaders undertaking new responsibilities either make wholesale changes at the start to avoid upsetting the existing order altogether, but both approaches tend to only increase the problems of organizations. Leaders must avoid dramatic pronouncements and actions to announce their arrival and show a willingness to learn before establishing a new order. However, the more pressing adaptability challenge is in dealing with a sudden and drastic change in the environment. Usually, leaders devote most of their time, energy, and intellect to doing more of what already works and hope that they would enjoy better luck than the competitors if and when the circumstances change. Adaptability requires continuous expectation of impending change, even if the precise change cannot be anticipated, and investing in acquiring new knowledge, assets, partnerships, and skills. Even more important is communicating the need for such preparation to all stakeholders and getting them on board for sudden and even costly maneuvers. In a constantly evolving environment, only the most adaptable survive. We are privileged to have Ms. Mukherjee, who has a lifetime of experience of undertaking ever new leadership responsibilities and making an impact in each of those. I'm sure that we will benefit greatly from this conversation with her. To start the discussions, I will invite Ms. Mukherjee after this to deliver her talk on the session's topic. I would request the audience to keep their questions ready and to write them on the chat box. I will be grouping the questions together at the end, but only after I ask Ms. Mukherjee some questions. Over to you, ma'am.
Nikhilji, thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction and for setting the context. Rekha ji, thank you very much for opening the session. And thank you to AIMA for inviting me for this. It's a great privilege and I recognize it as such. The topic that I'm going to speak on is on adaptive leadership. But as Rekha ji has advised me, I will try and contextualize it because leadership obviously is within a certain context. And for me, that context is, in my experience, largely in the public sector and in terms of working with communities, stakeholders, other people. So I'll try and contextualize it within that framework. But also, I would like to contextualize it within the framework of my experience as a woman working in a leadership position from a very early age and how that leadership style has evolved over time. And therefore, I'd also like to take a gendered approach to whatever I say. So one is I'm going to do some storytelling in terms of experiences. The other is also sort of try and talk about how, women in leadership positions and how our roles have evolved in the public sector. So to start with, and maybe just, so that I don't meander too much, I'm going to try and also sort of look at 3 or 4 traits of adaptive leadership. So the traits that I'm going to talk about are broadly, and I know there are more traits. One is listening. Because to me, that seems like one of the most important traits of adaptive leadership, which is a capacity to listen. And again, I mean, we've been talking about with my colleagues And one of the things that I always say that I think one of our responsibilities is that I'd listen to the devil if he or she came up with a good idea. So it's the idea that is coming through. It is what is being said rather than who is saying it that is important. And there are times that we need to differentiate that. So, but to start, so I started off as a young civil servant. At the age of 23, I was a subdivisional magistrate in Delhi. Difficult context, revenue administration, sitting down in courts, dealing with lawyers who were maybe twice my age. And so one was thrust into a leadership position. One was thrust into a position where you had to take decisions where there were people who had much more experience than you, but you were expected to lead. And this is true of many, many people who come into leadership roles at a relatively young age. So again, what I learned there is that people who work with you, people in your team who have experience, and this included my driver, this included people, the peshkar in my court, had advice to offer if I was willing to listen. Obviously, the advice would have to be weighed, but if it's dismissed out of hand, it's you sort of there is a lot of learning that is offered that gets, and that actually makes the decision is yours. But listening to people who have been in that sector for a long time, people, is something that is critically important. And opportunities, you have to create those opportunities. It's not necessary that if you don't have a reputation for listening, that people will come and talk to you. This I found again in, worked in different ways in different roles. For instance, when I was Chief Executive Officer of Delhi Jal Board, the institution is far from perfect. It is an engineering institution which I was working to try and transition into a more of a service delivery institution, and it's an uphill battle. It continues. There, and you dealing with legislators, you're dealing with the community, you're dealing with customers, and at each time you may not be able to satisfy everybody. However, again, if you institutionalize a listening role, even if you listen to somebody's problem, even if you're not able to solve that problem entirely, there is a much stronger sense of satisfaction. So for me, one of the most important attributes of adaptive leadership is a capacity to listen. This also, as we grow older in service, as time passes, it is, and I'm sure a lot of people here will agree, even though they don't say so outright. For people in the civil service, we tend to stop listening. We think we know it all. We've been through multiple kinds of experience. But the fact is that you move into new areas all the time, and also the context changes. So what I knew when I was in the field, when I was an SDM, when I was working in, let's say, the Delhi Pollution Control Committee, may not be true any longer. And therefore, that to keep updated, to keep listening to people is that much more important. And I think a good leader makes institutional, structural opportunities to be able to listen to the team, but also people from characteristic people. And there again, the important thing is how diverse are the people that you're listening to. if there is not diversity in the opinions that you get, then your decision is likely to be one-sided and maybe inadequate. This was one of the things that I also, sort of goal that I set for myself in the Prime Minister's office, where part of my role was to actually, give the Prime Minister perspective on the issues that I handled. And there again, it was important to reach out to multiple people to at least ensure that what the inputs that went to the Prime Minister were rounded rather than one-sided. So that for me is one of the one major attribute. The second thing, and I'm going to try and keep my speech or short, so that I have more questions. The second thing that I think I would like to emphasize is about, how do you get the best out of people? How do you get the best out of the people that you work with? In government, normally, your team is a given. You don't have an enormous amount of flexibility in changing the people that you work with, maybe one or two, and if you're very lucky, you can handpick some people, but not always. And not, majority of your team is a given. How do you work with that team? How do you ensure that they stay enthused, but also that you use the best of their abilities? So each person, I think, has certain things that they're very, very good at. So one of the ways to get the best out of a team and actually is to encourage them to deliver their best is to be able to identify those things and encourage those traits. For instance, if a person is a very good communicator, but not a details person, then their role has to be, so if you want to get the best of that person in a team, their role has to be tailored appropriately. It is a bad idea to expect everything of everybody. And so working with those teams and working with the capabilities, so being a good judge of character and being able to get the best out of a team, I think that is another attribute of, adaptive leadership going forward. What is it that your current task requires? What are the people that you work with capable of? And who is best at what? I mean, just again, another anecdote. As in the Ministry of Jal Shakti, Government of India, Nikhilji knows, and I suppose I think some of the people listening to me also know, that water is a state subject. So the action, the change in governance, the improvement happens in the states. Government of India's role is a nudge role. You nudge using financial resources, you do a certain amount of goal setting, you provide technical support. So recently, we wanted to move forward the agenda, particularly, in terms of goal setting and visioning for 2047. And we had a meeting of the state water ministers. Now, one of the major challenges that we see in the water sector is that water is dealt with in silos. Urban development looks after urban water supply and wastewater. Agriculture is responsible for, improving water use efficiency in irrigation. We handle irrigation, groundwater governance, things like that. So nobody has the complete picture. And one of the governance innovations, it's been done in a couple of states already, is looking at a single sector regulator who can take the entire governance agenda forward. Now that, at the Water Ministers' Conference, there were ways in which to do it. One was that Government of India says, we think that it's a good idea to have a sector regulator. The other idea, which was better, was to have some of the states that have done good work in the regulatory field and get their ministers to talk about the work that they've done. So what we did was we had the Haryana regulator and we had Mr. Devendra Fadnavis from Maharashtra to talk about regulation and the regulatory experience in their states, good, bad, indifferent. And the level of interest was amazing, and it worked much, much better than if, sort of government of India had started preaching about that issue. So how do you, one is that, where are you going? And how do you communicate? What are your allies? How do you get those allies together? So working out that strategy and being a little smart about it. The other, I think all of us work on this, is create networks. Who are the people who are likely, and that again has to be done consciously in every role. In every role, there has to be a network that helps you move forward. And actually, those networks sometimes work better than formal systems. So to consciously think through those networks, how to create them, and how best those networks can be used to complete a certain task that is assigned. Then again, I'd like to talk through this, through all of this. I think one of the things that I found very interesting is how women in the civil services have evolved over time. This is entirely my experience and my perception, but the generation or two before me had to consciously sort of look at they had to be consciously more, in terms of their personal styles, they had to be consciously more, quote unquote, man-like. You had to sort of be more stern. There were certain personality traits that you had to cultivate to be taken seriously in the service. By the time we came into the service, we were actually standing on the shoulders of our predecessors who had already established a reputation for themselves. So it was much easier. So therefore, we had the liberty and flexibility to evolve our own styles, which were not necessarily, which could be maybe a little with more empathy. We had greater flexibility. And I think that has also changed about the service, and particularly for the women in the service. That's been an interesting transition. Maybe somebody can talk about it a little more. The last point that I'd like to talk about is communication. I think if you cannot communicate effectively with a clear understanding of who you're talking to, what is it that you're trying to say? And what is it that that person is hearing? I think communication is one area where we fail frequently. It's not something that we're not trained for. And increasingly, our leadership roles, as well as our necessity to work with communities, needs communication. And those communication skills are critical for somebody in a leadership position. I will stop here, and I hope there will be questions that I can answer so that we can take this conversation forward.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mukherjee. Very enthralling opening remarks, and I truly appreciate your insight into the 4 or 5 points you made about how you see adaptive leadership in terms of listening and communication, and how to get the most out of your people, as well as creating networks. I think your point about women specific, especially within the service, and how the great work that was done by our predecessors in terms of getting women now to be able to stand on their own feet rather than take on the responsibilities or the style of functioning that men may do is truly laudable. We've had many questions which are coming up on the chat, but I have some questions which I wanted to pose to you first. I'd like to structure them into 2 segments, if I may. One is more about your personal experiences about leadership, and then more specifically about your current role in the Ministry of Jal Shakti. But so first on the broader aspect of your experience within the service, being a civil servant, you've moved around the country, and between the central government as well as state governments, it must be a challenge to continuously change your surrounding colleagues and responsibilities. And you talked about it. You don't get to choose sometimes the people that you work with. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience about how you managed to adapt quickly to each new setup and responsibility, and how were you able to do that as quickly, because you recognize that in the service that your tenure in any posting is limited, it's time bound.
So, so there are two parts to my career, really. And the first part was basically where I worked more as a generalist. So a subdivisional magistrate working on revenue administration and more of a regulatory role. Then as a deputy commissioner in Arunachal Pradesh, and back to Delhi as a deputy commissioner again in Goa. A lot of the work that I did was more of, I worked across sectors. So one, we trained for revenue management, but there were roles that I had gone into without knowing a tremendous amount about it. For instance, I started working on health, but part of it is learn as much as you can, as quickly as you can, learn from your predecessors. Again, one of the problems with our service is that, you frequently tend to discount what your predecessor has done. It is important to actually take stock of what has happened, because it is important to build on and take forward initiatives, good things that have happened before you join. That makes that I think makes a bureaucrat more effective, rather than the personal glory of I started this and I finished it. Very frequently you won't be able to, given that you have 2 years or 3 years in an assignment. It doesn't give you enough time to see through something that you have started. So the best way to do it is, one, obviously learn quickly, pick up, so that, and talk to, again, as I said, listen, talk, learn quickly. The second thing is figure out what has been happening, what are the key initiatives, what are the things that have been happening, what are the things that your predecessor started, and try and finish those, and hope that somebody will then take up and finish the things that you started. So that's important. But the second part of my career, and this started in Goa, was where I was given responsibility of the water and sanitation sector, and I was also given responsibility of the health sector. And we had an outbreak of hepatitis. We tracked it to contaminated water. That's what started my interest in the water sector. Thereafter, after working in the water sector, then I consciously realized that I needed an academic degree. And again, I was lucky enough to be able to get an academic degree. So the domain knowledge. And since then, most of my work, I think 80% of my work, has been in water and sanitation. So again, water has multiple aspects. So I first learned about water sanitation services. I learned about utility management, and now I'm learning more about integrated water resource management. So domain knowledge helps. It gives you a head start wherever you are. So for me, for my colleagues in the civil service, I think that work as a generalist for the first 10 to 12 years, so that you have the basic skills about learning about communities, learning basic governance, institutions. But thereafter, it is good to have a certain amount of domain knowledge, because then you're a little more effective.
I think I didn't understand about that specialization, but I think it is truly a very important task to be able to lead effectively with the adequate domain knowledge. Could I ask you, how much after your service, you're joining the service, did you take on the role in Goa, which gave you the insight into sanitation and water?
About 15 years.
So, ma'am, without getting too much into water, because that is a subject I think that I personally have a lot of interest in, and I know that you, not only academically, but with your vast experience in terms of looking of the variety of different issues that the country faces in water. Uh, Maybe I could ask you first, in terms of in your administrative experience in this public service, which of your postings have you found to be the most challenging in terms of adaptation and the most satisfying in terms of the impact that you could make? Given the fact that you have many more years of service, so we won't look too much into the future.
So I think, let me give you the answer, which will sound diplomatic, but is true. The good thing about the service is that it gives you're never bored. You could be infuriated, exasperated, but never bored. So I have actually enjoyed all of my assignments. I think the one that I found the most challenging, and this is going to be very uncharacteristic, was the one in I was Secretary Social Welfare and Women and Child Development in Delhi. And here, Delhi government runs about 70 homes of different kinds. These are all homes that, so homes for people with mental illness, homes for children, children in conflict with society, homes for children who have, so multiple kinds of homes. Just managing those institutions was extremely, extremely challenging. I mean, with the best will in the world, the people who run those homes have an extremely difficult job on their hands. I mean, imagine we have difficulty in our households handling 1 or 2 kids. But think about, handling 120 kids, each of them suffering from some kind of trauma. And therefore, there is this problem of people getting, desensitized over time. One of the things that, and I think what gave me satisfaction was that, and what we also tend to do is sometimes there are problems in those homes, so we tend to close it to any kind of scrutiny or participation from people who may want to contribute. So one of the things that I managed to do, which improved the condition in the homes somewhat, was to get in multiple organizations to work with those homes. So open up those homes to civil society organizations who brought in, theater, music. So one hoped that one made the lives of people living in those homes a little better. But with that, there was the sense of inadequacy and the sense that whatever you're doing is never enough and never good enough. Does that answer your question?
Yes. It seems like a very challenging responsibility in a place which requires utmost care, and usually these are neglected people in society, and you have to really be very grateful that the administration took, and the Delhi administration took it upon themselves. And I think the call that you had to take in terms of getting outside civil society agencies and not-for-profits to help assist is truly I think a bold decision at that point in time, to not only rely on the resources of the administration of that department. And I think that that leads me to my next question, which is that often you talked about how do you get the most out of the people that you work with, but often you work with people outside the system as well, and you need them to perform for the larger goals that you set, the larger objectives that you may have, both short-term as well as long-term. And sometimes they come with vested interests, sometimes they come with other agendas, which may not truly align with the greater purpose of the work that the services is geared towards. How do you deal with people like this from a perspective of leadership? How do you deal with them from the perspective of and I don't want to talk about ethics because that's not really material, but it may be something that you may wish to touch upon. If you have any experience in this, ma'am, it would always be helpful for our viewers.
So we work with civil society. I mean, you have to work with civil society, and there is frequently a lot of suspicion between, government functionaries or government systems and civil society. I think that, one is the one, and I think it is critical to work with civil society. That again is a skill that we need to develop, that some of us have, but as an institution, we are probably not very good at it. But so I think the most important thing is to have is to structure expectations. There, I think there needs to be a framework. There needs to be, this is my expectation of you, and this is your expectation of me. This is true of any partnership. And maybe structure that in advance. But once you have structured that and the relationship is in progress, there also needs to be a degree of trust, and also needs to be, you need to revisit that structure from time to time. It doesn't have to be set in stone. There needs to be flexibility there also, because contexts change, people change, you may need to do different things. So therefore, I think, so one is, yes, try and set out certain expectations in advance. A level of scrutiny in this also, I mean, we do have certain frameworks where, you look at civil society, people who want to work with you, and you figure out that you have common interests. So use that. But again, I think one of the important things is trust, but also accountability mechanisms on both sides.
Thank you. Now coming a little bit onto the water space, it's truly been under the recent governments where we've seen, as you said, an alignment of the Jal Shakti ministry in terms of getting a number of other ministries under itself, and we've seen some state governments take that impetus forward as well in terms of aligning their responsibilities under a more accountable head. I've also seen that the Minister of Jal Shakti is extremely knowledgeable and very data oriented and has a keen grasp of all the facts and figures. But ma'am, the situation is quite dire. The fact is that we are losing availability of water on a per capita basis. We do have issues which are exogenous to us, such as climate change, which are exacerbating that situation. And you spent a lot of your career managing water resources. How have you seen the water situation evolve, especially because of climate change? And what can India do to avoid any catastrophe? Given the fact, of course, as you pointed out to begin with, that this is a state subject, and when you look at urban water, it may actually become a municipal subject, and you have issues in terms of funding and financing at that local level, as well as competency and capability to take through the vision that may be ascribed by an authority such as a Jal Shakti or ministry like Jal Shakti.
So in terms of climate change, I think the current assessments are saying that India will have almost the same amount. There will not be a reduction in the total precipitation that we have over the next 50 years. I mean, this is the prediction of the next 50 years. However, that said, there are expected to be changes, and I think these are already in progress, changes in the water cycle, which means that there will be greater temporal and spatial variability and greater uncertainty. We will have more extreme precipitation events, which mean more flooding. We will have longer dry spells, which again mean droughts. So these are the likely impacts of climate change on water availability in India. With that, we also have the issue of per capita availability, which is obviously a function of the increasing population. And with greater economic prosperity, with growth, we also see that the per capita water use goes up. So we have seen, again, for drinking water, so rural drinking water supply, we used to talk about 40 LPCT. Today, Jal Jeevan Mission is talking about 55 LPCD, and already there are demands that it should be increased to 70 LPCD. So as we develop, the per capita demand for water will also grow. And lack of water can become a significant inhibitor of growth. We've always said that. Also, the climate change variability will affect the poorest and the most vulnerable. This includes women, and our investments in the Jal Jeevan Mission, which is water to every household, sustainability of those investments will be a huge issue unless we look at better sustainability of our water resources. Now, what are the broad solutions? And I hate to say solutions because that sounds because there are so many variables in this word solutions when we talk about water, and so many stakeholders. So one of the things is increased storage. And there I don't just mean storage, large storage, which is dams and reservoirs, but also definitely better management of dams and reservoirs. Reduce siltation of reservoirs, because we are losing storage because of siltation, because of poor management of catchments. So definitely better management of dams and reservoirs, but also local level storage, which is your ponds, water bodies, ensure that all of them are in the condition to sort of harvest as much water as possible, and also not lose track of the fact that the biggest reservoir that we have is under our feet. The fact that groundwater is normally invisible is something that, one of the things that we really need to do is to make groundwater more visible. Nobody knows what, unless you're in the water sector, you don't care about what the quality of your groundwater is, what is its depth. I wouldn't be able to tell you. So that's one. So storage. The second big push is on water use efficiency. And there, I think our big thrust will be in the area, is going to be in the area of agriculture. Agriculture uses about 80% of available water. 38% is the water use efficiency in agriculture. So if we can improve our water infrastructure, which is the canal conveyance system, if we can improve on-farm efficiency, which is hugely encourage drip, micro irrigation, and if we can look at reuse of treated water, we will be able to free up fresh water for ecological systems, for river health, but also for other uses. So again, I could go on and on about this, but I'll stop here.
No, I can see the passion, ma'am. It really is a subject that I think is very deep in your heart. Just to give you an anecdote, when you talk about agriculture, at some point, we as a group have interest in sugar as well. And I was working with our sugar businesses to see how we could expand yield for farm income. And we cover about 350,000 hectares in UP, the farmers who supply us cane. And what we found is that flood irrigation was a norm in terms of West UP, where we have ample water available in terms of groundwater. And just by moving from flood irrigation to furrow irrigation, and not even drip or any other form of sophisticated irrigation technique, we would be able to not only raise the yield because of increased row spacing, but get a multi-crop in, but also reduce usage of all resources, because the usage of water is proportionate then to the usage of fertilizer and pesticide, because it is dilutive in nature. And very frankly, it was a tough sell, but I think the success that we have as a group in that agricultural field is driven by our view of minimizing resource utilization. Primary amongst those was water. And I think that your comments on groundwater are music to my ears, because it's one of the greatest public goods that we have. And in this day and age, when we're talking about digital public goods, which have been so widely adopted, be it in terms of UPI or ONDC or a variety of other digital public goods, our greatest public good, which is our aquifers, really are not treated with the care that they should. And thank you for highlighting it, because I think it's very important that we educate people on what is this shared resource and what is the easiest form for us to increase the availability of storage during, like you said, the high volatile precipitation times. But despite that, in the interim, while we come up with the infrastructure that is required to ensure that Jal Jeevan gets, we lay the infrastructure, but we need to ensure that we have sustainability of water availability at every village. It's still going to be a very political issue between states. And we're going to have issues not only between countries, our neighbor in the West, but we also have it within states in the South and possibly other parts of the country as well. This is always an issue which ultimately gets highlighted to some chief ministerial conclave, and it's highlighted maybe even at the prime minister's level. But ultimately, it is your department and your ministry, Jal Shakti, which has to take a balanced view of citizens' needs, of different stakeholders who have the competing demands, and the fact that it is such a sensitive issue in what you said is an era of climate change where the precipitation is going to change to in an unknown manner, in uncertain manner. You're going to have floods and you're going to have droughts, and they may be happening at the same time in different parts of the country. Ma'am, going back to the issue of leadership, how do you balance these requirements and at the same time take everyone along? Because ultimately we are one country and one nation and one people.
It's a tough call. It's easier to use water for political grandstanding than to create, fora for water cooperation. One, of course, is one of the things that we're looking at is, I don't know if you know about the Atal Bhujal Yojana, which is talking about village water security plans. It is about the community taking ownership of their water resources, participatory groundwater management, and working together. It's still very much work in progress. So, but what we're trying to do is we're also now trying to mainstream these village water security plans to through the Gram Panchayat GPDP, as we call it, the Gram Panchayat Development Plan, so that it gets institutionalized. So a village or a Gram Panchayat takes responsibility at least for its own water security. The fact that you have to prioritize drinking water and drinking water for humans and drinking water for animals before you use the water for water guzzling crops. Can we create those pressure groups at the village level? That is one. And I'm talking about the absolute grassroots level. Thereafter, again, districts and states have to look at what they need to do for their water security. And the third area is that we have institutions that are supposed to resolve water disputes. So we have tribunals. If there's a water dispute between two states, we have an act, we have institutions. We don't really have institutions that are supposed to foster water cooperation. And we've been talking about that. We have some examples. For instance, for the Ganga, the National Mission for Clean Ganga has a group of 5 chief ministers who sit together and talk about river health, and that is actually now moving out to look at basin management. Going forward, I think we need to foster more such institutions, both at the administrative level and thereafter at the political level. So can we move from water disputes to water cooperation? This is the way forward. It's not going to happen in the short term.
Thank you very much for that. Ma'am, we have about over 230 people on Zoom. We have over 240 people in social media channels. And we have also over 110 students who've gathered in different areas watching this at this point in time. So, and a lot of questions have come in. So I'm going to try and group them together into a couple of questions because we do have limited time of another 10 odd minutes of your time. And so I wanted to get some of their views in as well, so that that they could possibly gain from your wisdom. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask a couple of them together, and maybe you could
Sure.
answer
But I
them.
don't pretend to have any wisdom.
Ma'am, the questions are coming, so I'll try to group them into
Sure.
bunches as to the way that I understand them best.
Okay.
But I think that they're somewhat aligned to what you had spoken about earlier. And the first set of questions are around the issue of team members not really agreeing and accepting your decision. And one of the questions goes as follows: when you need to lead a group of people, that there are chances that all the team members may not agree the decisions, instructions given by you. In such cases, how do you influence such people to understand about your decision, get them to accept it?
Okay.
And similarly,
are you going to group more questions, or should I answer this?
Sure, ma'am. Why don't you answer this, and then I'll try to group the others in the meantime.
Okay. Okay. So I think again, I work in a hierarchy, in a fairly hierarchical system. So my answer may not be sort of everybody's lived experience. I think one of the things that works with teams is if you set your priorities as a team. That said, some of the priorities may come to you from your hierarchy. Okay. And there are certain things that are finally, once you've taken a decision, there are certain things that are a given. If team members are, one is you share your vision, you try and get them to, you try and assign to them that the roles that you think that they're the best fit for, you listen to them when they have, inputs to give, and keep that door open all the time. After that, once a decision is taken, I think it is also important to be firm about, look, this is, we've been through this process, we've thought it through, and now that the decision is taken, we have to execute it. This is also part of the bureaucracy. So I don't know if that answers your question well enough.
I think it's a wonderful question. Can I add another dynamic, which is some of the questions that have come through, and these are some females, some women, ladies who are asking this question as to how would that, of course, your experience has been as a woman in terms of leading those situations. And to speak specifically as a woman, do you think it's been more difficult, or is this something that would have been equally as such if there was a more male camaraderie between your colleagues?
So it is true that as a woman, there are certain networks that you cannot access. This is true. That said, I mean, I think, again, this is moderated by my experience because I've worked in states and I worked in fairly non-hierarchical and slightly, I worked in Arunachal Pradesh, which doesn't have a huge issue in terms of gender, etc. I worked in Goa again. The states that I've worked in have been very different. I may have said, my comment may have been different had I worked in Rajasthan or some of the other more feudal, more patriarchal states. But that has not been my experience. My experience has been Government of India, the state of Goa, the state of Arunachal Pradesh, the state of Delhi. That said, again, what I found really, what I find is women in leadership positions also bring in other women in leadership positions. At one point in Delhi, the chief minister was a woman, the chief secretary was a woman, the CEO Jal Board was a woman, the transport commissioner was a woman, and that, it broke a lot of it broke a lot of glass ceilings. Before I had been CEO Delhi Jal Board, there had never been a woman CEO of Delhi Jal Board. However, when I came in, and I came in with a master's degree in water and environment management, the Chief Minister of Delhi, she didn't, consider it before posting me as CEO of Delhi Jal Board. So for my women colleagues and friends out there, I think it is important to nurture, mentor, provide space for other women, and open those doors that might be otherwise shut. When I worked in DTC, one of the things that I managed to do was bring in, ensure that we had women drivers. Because women, a driver in DTC needed a commercial license for 3 years. No woman would be allowed to drive a heavy vehicle in the private sector. So we could not get women as DTC bus drivers. So what we did was we said, okay, we will take the women, any woman who has a commercial license, even if she hasn't driven a heavy vehicle, we'll take her in, we'll train her ourselves. And then we will, so you need to open those doors. And therefore, women in leadership positions, I think have the responsibility, but also make space for other women.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I think it's very important that it is also partly the responsibility of women in leadership positions to mentor other women to take on those roles. And I think that this is a message to the broader audience here, in terms of if you have that responsibility and that opportunity, that you should take that mentorship responsibility on yourself. Thank you very much, ma'am. We have come to, there are many, many more questions. And if you don't mind, I would, just so that you are aware of the questions that people were asking based on your speech and your answers to questions, we will have them sent to your office so that you're aware of what concerns people have. Some of them are related to water, and I think that you would find those interesting. Some of them are more leadership-based questions. But ladies and gentlemen, I know that you don't have the opportunity to clap and thank Ms. Mukherjee for being with us today. So I'll do that on your behalf. Thank you very, very much, ma'am, for being with us. It's been a truly enlightening experience for me personally, and I'm sure that our guests and members and audience have really appreciated the time that you spent with us. We look forward to taking this dialogue further in maybe other forums, and look forward to your being with us and being with AIMA and educating us more on this very crucial space of women leadership, but also equally in the space of water management. And you used this fantastic word of integrated water resource management and spatial and temporal analysis. So we'd love to understand more about where we are as a country and how we should all take responsibility. Thank you very much, and I'd let Rekha say the last words.
As you can see, Nikhil is, he knows that he should let the women have the last word and let women at least start the program and end the program. So thank you, Nikhil, and thank you so much, Ms. Mukherjee. I think it was a brilliant session, and it was great having you. And personally, as a woman leader, it's always very satisfying to interact with another one. And from the comments that I see on the chat box, I think it was a very, very useful session for all our delegates. And I really want to thank you for sparing your time. I know you've been very busy, but thank you so much for sparing time. And I would just add to what Nikhil said, that I hope this is the first of many interactions you have with AIMA. Thank you. And thank you to all the delegates for joining us today, and to Nikhil for moderating the session. Thanks for a great evening, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to me so patiently. I'll try and respond to as many of the comments as I can. Thank you.
There have been a lot of comments, so we'll also mail those to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.